Greetings, everyone. Thank you for viewing my presentation titled How to Have a Conversation About Racism, a Social, Psychological, and Humanistic Perspective. In this video, Toni Morrison discusses her perspective and/or definition of racism.
Why has racism been so dominant in our life? What is it about?
It's about feeling good. I mean, racist.
You need to feel that you are better than someone, and
Some
so with every ethnic group that comes to America, it's
sure.
African Americans who they need to feel better.
Oh, yeah, they made some changes, but there was always, in other words, if a German or an Italian or whomever came to this country trying to Americanize himself, he could sort of stay with Germans or stay with Italians or stay with Irish people, which in fact frequently they did. But in order to become an American, to have consort with, easy relationships with people from other parts of Europe, the one thing that could unify you is that you were no longer an Italian. Now you're white. That was the unifying stroke. If all of those people from Europe who weren't white in Europe, but they got white here.
And
that was the
that
lesson.
gave them a unity.
That's right.
And it gave them a bond with a group. It gave them something that makes up the facade.
It became whiteness as ideology.
Arthur Ashe was here, the late Arthur Ashe,
yes.
and he said to me, as he had said at one other place, he said, in a much quoted comment, he said, living with AIDS is easier than living racist. It's a harder struggle against racism for me than it is against AIDS. What it meant to me is that there's no way for the rest of us to understand that daily encounter. Which brings me to my question to you. Do you still have that encounter? Do you, Toni Morrison, Pulitzer Prize winner, successful, honored in the halls of academia, etc., still have that encounter?
Yes, I do, Charlie, but let me tell you, that's the wrong question.
Okay, what's the right question?
How do you feel? Not you, Charlie Wilson, but don't you understand that the people who do this thing, who practice racism, are bereft? There is something distorted about the psyche. It's a huge waste, and it's a corruption and a distortion. It's a profound neurosis that nobody examines for what it is. It feels crazy. It is crazy. And it has just as much of a deleterious effect on white people and possibly equal as it does black people. I always knew that I had the moral high ground all my life. I always thought those people who said I couldn't come in the drugstore and I had to sit in these funny places, I couldn't go in the park.
Superior to them
I did. And I thought they knew that I knew that they were inferior to me morally. I always thought that. And my parents always thought that. But if the racist white person, I don't mean the person who is examining his consciousness and so on, doesn't understand that he or she is also a race. It's also constructed. It's also made. And it also has some kind of serviceability. But when you take it away, I take your race away. And there you are, all strung out. And all you got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? Still smart? You still like yourself? I mean, these are the questions. It's part of it is, yes, the victim, how terrible it has been for black people.
You don't like that.
I'm not a victim. I refuse to be one.
And the victim is the other person who is morally inferior. And
that's a serious question.
On to
of course.
Racism
if you have to hold
for his or her own self-esteem and definition.
If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And my feeling is white people have a very, very serious problem. And they should start thinking about what they can do about it. Take me out of it.
Then give white people some free advice.
They're all in my books.
And the advice is to come to grips.
Of course.
With your own fears.
Absolutely.
Your own
Look at
fears.
It. Absolutely. Your own fears, your own history, and what you need. What do you need this for? You know, It's not, I said glibly a moment ago, but it feels good. It must feel good, otherwise they'd give it up. It's wasteful. Right. It costs a lot. It's ugly. It hurts. What are you paying for that for?
Driven by fear.
That's right.
Yeah. Give me your take on Rodney King in Los Angeles and all of that experience.
The most remarkable thing to me about Rodney King and what happened afterwards was people kept saying, oh, this terrible explosion, oh, the riots, oh, this is awful and could have been avoided, or what is it about? What struck me most about the people who were burning down shops and stealing was how long they waited. The restraint, not the spontaneity, the restraint. You realize the moment to be anarchic was when we saw those tapes. When we first saw those tapes.
They waited for justice.
They waited. How long was that? 9 months? A year?
Yeah.
They waited for justice almost a year and didn't come. No one talks about the fact that no one ran out into the streets as I wanted to. I was sitting in there with my son. It was like a ballet. It was unbelievable. And I think everybody felt that way. And no one, they didn't do a thing. They waited. That's amazing. That's amazing to me.
The purpose of this presentation is to discuss why we should have a conversation about racism, provide a brief discussion of the racial tension and or situations that are and or have been a catalyst of racism, provide a personal perspective of a conversation about racism and solutions to work towards preventing racism, and a call to action. In this video, Tony Evans defines and discusses racism.
In light of all that's taking place today, there's so many questions. The division, the conflict, the misunderstanding. I thought I would take a moment to address one of the subjects that regularly comes up that people are confused about, and that is, what is systemic racism? Well, first of all, let's define racism. Racism is the conscious or unconscious belief in the superiority of one's race over and against another race. That feeling, that belief gets manifested in the use of power or influence or resources or even communication that seeks to reject or marginalize or even oppress a person of another color, race, or ethnicity. When we talk about systemic racism, we're talking about the presence of racism, as we've just defined it, being embedded into the structures of society, whether those structures are political or economic or legal or medical or related to housing or employment. It is where it has become part of the policies or procedures of a way a particular entity operates. Of course, we're all aware of the evil system of slavery. That was a legal system that oppressed a group of people because of the color of their skin. But that got embedded into other structures in society. For example, criminal justice. There was a practice called peonage or debt servitude, where after the 13th Amendment was established granting freedom to slaves, there was a clause that said unless you're a criminal. So What was done was the criminalizing of men for the most minor of infractions so that the 13th Amendment could not be applied. And they would be held in servitude, oftentimes way beyond what they were arrested for. And many times they were arrested for little or nothing in order to keep them from being able to claim the freedom that was being granted by the 13th Amendment. It showed up in the way people were denied employment or educational opportunities or being able to access the goods and services during Jim Crow segregation. It showed up in churches that were unwilling to accept people of a different race because of the color of their skin. Well, I can speak personally when I was told when I was trying to enter into the media ministry that a black speaker would offend too many of our white listeners. There was a system at work that was denying equal opportunity and equal access. Those systems, while a person may not be personally a racist, can be supported by supporting the structure that is that way. And unless you're not only not a racist, but that you speak against racism where it shows up, it can continue to be part of the fiber of a particular way a particular structure operates. When you understand that in a race, some people, if they are allowed to get started quicker and faster, or start at a starting point much ahead of where another group is, that the group behind has to play catch up. And at least being empathetic and sympathetic, that has been a historical reality, not only in people's personal views, but in the structures that people have believed in, supported, affirmed. Then you understand why there is a catch up that needs to take place. And when you understand that, appreciate that, and grasp that, it does give you a different sensitivity to the reality. Now, of course, that sensitivity must be handled in a not only an empathetic way, but a responsible way. But at the same time, just knowing that people have been held back, people of color have been held back by structures, not just by individuals, helps you to understand why certain elements within our society need to be corrected so that equal opportunity is granted, the granting that God gives all men and the granting that the United States offers to all of us as well.
I believe that in order to understand and or have a conversation regarding systemic racism, we should first define and discuss concepts that encompass racism. Although there are several concepts that can provide a foundation for a conversation regarding racism, I believe that social and humanistic psychology are two perspectives that can provide a good foundation for this topic. In the field of psychology, social psychology is the scientific study of how the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of individuals are influenced by the actual, imagined, and implied presence of others. The humanistic perspective is defined as the assumption in psychology that people are essentially good and constructive, that the tendency toward self actualization is inherent and that given the proper environment, human beings will develop to their maximum potential. History has provided an averse meaning of the humanistic perspective and have been supported by the definition and studies within the field of social psychology. Current thoughts and feelings regarding racism within society may have been impaired by past experiences that have created distrust due to the systemic racism. The Jim Crow era is most certainly a factor of systemic racism. The video above briefly shares information regarding Jim Crow, a catalyst to white supremacy and or racism.
In this video, I want to talk about the system of Jim Crow segregation, which was common in the United video, I want to talk about the system of Jim Crow segregation, which was common in the United States from about 1877 to approximately 1954, although it goes a little bit farther than that. Now, you're probably familiar with some of the aspects of Jim Crow segregation from the civil rights movement. Jim Crow segregation involved the loss of voting rights for African Americans, as well as separate public accommodations. And by public accommodations, I mean all sorts of public spaces in American life. So this might be transportation, separate areas and trains and buses, or hotels, bathrooms, swimming pools, water fountains. So these places in public life where African Americans were put in the place of a second class citizenship, where they could not experience the full range of movement, job benefits, protection of the law, or really any of the aspects of American citizenship that are the benefits that come with paying taxes and abiding by the law. And during this period of Jim Crow, this kind of segregation was legal. This was not just in practice, but encoded in the law. So where did this system of Jim Crow come from? Well, let's start with the name Jim Crow. Jim Crow was not the name of a specific person. Actually, Jim Crow was the name of a stock character. A stock character is kind of a basic, well-known character in usually a comedy, and we still have stock characters in comedy today in lots of different forms of entertainment. Think of the absent-minded professor, or more recently, the manic pixie dream girl. You know, the girl who's going to change your whole life by being so off the wall. Well, Jim Crow was one of these characters in a form of entertainment called the minstrel show. And the minstrel show was a very popular kind of vaudeville type live performance. The minstrel show was actually very popular in the north of the United States, places like New York City, in the 1830s, 1840s, kind of this antebellum period before the Civil War. So this character of Jim Crow was supposed to be kind of the stupid slave who lived on the plantation. And this character of Jim Crow was almost always played by a white man wearing black makeup on his face. So it was not an actual African American person, but rather a caricature of an African American person by a white man who was part of a minstrel troupe. And so the name Jim Crow became kind of synonymous with African Americans and with enslaved people in the early 19th century, the way that, say, Paddy became synonymous with an Irish person. So the term Jim Crow law or the Jim Crow system means laws that were specifically aimed at African Americans. All right, so that's the origin of the name. But where did the system come from? And for that, we're going to have to do a fairly deep dive into American history. And I won't be able to go into everything here, but let's kind of look at this from the 1,000-foot view and get a sense of the overall pattern of slavery, the Civil War, and race relations after the Civil War to see where Jim Crow starts. Now, I've been daring here and done a vertical timeline. The first thing we have on here is the end of the Civil War. Now, before the Civil War, in the southern part of the United States, which I have outlined in red here, most of these states had legal slavery. And in these states, or the colonies that preceded them, starting about 1620, they imported African slaves to be unfree laborers on cash crop plantations. And these might include tobacco or cotton. And that system of slavery persisted until the balance of power between the North, where slavery was largely illegal, and the South, where slavery was the backbone of the economic and political system. Eventually, it tore the country apart into the Civil War. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, saying that all enslaved people in the states which were currently in rebellion were now free. But it wasn't until the end the Civil War that slavery's end was official everywhere in the United States. And the end of slavery really posed a problem for the states of the South. Now, obviously, this was a wonderful thing for people who had been enslaved. Now they had full freedom to move and work and marry whomever they pleased, at least in theory. But it also meant that the system of slavery, which had dominated the politics, the economics, the social system of the South, for more than 200 years was now over, and something had to replace it. So, in the immediate period after the Civil War, the question is, what are race relations going to look like in the South? How will whites and blacks relate to each other without the system of slavery, which has dominated the entire region for more than 200 years? And we'll get into that in our next video.
Why is it challenging to have a conversation about racism? It is challenging to have a conversation about racism because of the hurt, humiliation, and lack of healing and trust that extends from slavery and or Jim Crow. Discrimination, prejudice, and stereotypes towards African Americans may dissipate if individuals are educated on and or understand African American culture. Having an understanding and or knowledge of an outgroup and or another culture could decrease bias between groups. In the following video, Kama Bell and Kelly Clarkson discuss how to have a conversation about racism.
He's the host of his own hit CNN show, United Shades of America. It's amazing. You should check it out. Let's welcome W. Kamau Bell. Hey, what's up, Kamau? How you doing?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me.
Did you think? Because here on the show, we want this to be an active and open forum for everyone to share their experiences and thoughts. But do you think that what you've been doing is kind of what's happening right now? Like,
I mean, I think like the conversations that I've been having on United Shades, I've been hearing all my life from my mom, friends of my mom. Like my mom's a single mother, which means as a kid you go everywhere your single mom does because she's not paying for babysitters, doesn't have the money. So I was always around a lot of adult conversations, and I was born like a few years after the civil rights movement sort of peaked, and so there's a lot of conversations about what do we do next. So for me, this is just the conversation I was always hearing, and I feel really honored that CNN invites me to have them on TV because me and my friends have these conversations all the time, but I know the CNN audience isn't always having those conversations.
we're starting the conversation in our work family. How have you been starting the conversation in your family about George Floyd and the protests?
Well, because I work for the news, we have the news on all the time. We just had it on before I sat down with you, and my kids ask questions. I got a 9-year old and 5-year old, and they ask questions about what's going on. And the thing I think a lot of people, especially white people, are afraid of is like, I don't want to show my kids the news because I don't know how they'll handle the information or I don't know what to tell them. But for me, it's like, just do the same thing you do with your kid anytime. Talk to them and answer the question. And at some point, your kid will let you know when they've had enough because they'll be like, I don't understand, or they'll just walk off and go
Walk
do something
away.
else.
Yeah,
Like
just
so,
walk away. It's like an attention span of a gnat. Yeah.
yeah.
No,
But
I agree. So many people that I've talked to as well, in the limelight, not in the limelight, they're afraid to say the wrong thing. They're afraid, like when they, and sometimes I feel like that's happened with me. Like I say something, I'm like, that is not what I meant at all. Like that, like wait, what? Like so, what do you say to that? Like, because I don't think people should be quiet because that hasn't helped.
yeah.
But at the same time, what if they're afraid? Like what they're saying is going to be twisted.
I'd say don't be afraid of saying the wrong thing. Be confident you're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to say the wrong thing. Like it's be step into saying the wrong thing boldly. And the key part is when somebody tells you to say the wrong thing, go, oh, did I say the wrong thing?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What is the right thing? Or tell me where I can go find out what the right thing is, and I will learn to say the right thing. I
Yeah.
think people's fear of saying the wrong thing, again, white people, it then puts them in a place where they never say anything, which is why we have, George Floyd obviously is not the first person to be killed by a police.
Not Breonna Taylor. I mean, we could go on.
Breonna Taylor,
Right?
yeah, there's
Yeah.
Tony McDade, and there's been people since there's been black people since George Floyd who've been killed by cops under circumstances that don't make any sense. So, but the fact is that I think for the most part, white people, because they're not continuing the conversation, it's like every time it happens, it's a new. It's like
Well,
I can't believe that happened.
yeah.
And I think you have to realize if you were had invested in the conversation, let's say if your great grandparents had invested in it during when Emmett Till was murdered, we wouldn't have to be having the conversation now.
Honestly, this whole conversation is why we've started the conversation specifically in our own environment because I think sometimes we start thinking of the problem and it gets so big. Like when I think of world hunger, when I think of Black Lives Matter, when I think of, anything, I just start going, oh, it's such a big problem. Like, how are we going to fix it? But I think if you focus in your own small community, if everybody does that, then that's where change can happen because you start focusing, you start calling your friends out, calling yourself out, allowing people to talk and actually listening, like you're saying. Like, and I think that's why we wanted to start the conversation with our show and being the change that we want to see. And I just want to thank you because I know that you've been doing this for years because I've been one of your viewers. So,
Thank you.
well, y'all look for season 5 of Kamal's Emmy-winning show. It's amazing. United Shades of America.
Insanity is defined as doing the same thing but hoping to gain different results. We keep facing this same racial injustice because we are either too hurt and or uncertain about how to discuss the injustices and continuously request policies that can prevent those injustices. We may repeat the same historical events that cause distrust, hurt, frustration, and a lack of understanding if we do not have the conversations about racism and how we can start to move forward toward and how we can move forward despite the past. How can we contribute to the prevention of racism? Trying times equals this situation is so messed up. However, I don't know what to say. So it's probably best to say nothing at all. Trying times is the common response because we have not been having the conversations. One side doesn't know how to approach the conversation, and the other side is too hurt and or frustrated to discuss the conversation. Here is a genuine discussion between my friend and I, one that I believe is a good conversation starter regarding racism. My friend, We are sad, disgusted, and angry over Mr. Floyd's cruel and senseless death. Yet we are determined not to lose hope that our country can find ways to heal from the wounds and pain that have been afflicted on our Black citizens for too many years. We want to make a difference, but don't know how we can make our voices heard beyond mere voting. We just feel that if each of us concerned citizens does our part, however small or large, that we can propel real change. We know that many before us had the same goal, yet there's still so much to be done to force progress. In his powerful blog post, Mark Mason, CFO of Citibank, recommended donating to several organizations that fight injustice and inequality, which we plan to do. What other actions can we take? My response to my friend: these are very trying times for us all. I teared up when I saw the marches and our demonstrations in Europe, and of course, every time I see the video clip of Mr. Floyd being killed, I really wish that I wouldn't have seen the video at all. We will get through this together. I have a strong hope that we will. Although it was traumatic, Mr. Floyd's death will not be in vain. Black men have been endangered species since they arrived over 400 years ago. Their deaths made obvious by being low hanging fruit on trees. However, there was no evidence as to how they met their demise back then, although we knew. Fast forward to the many freedom advocates we lost of all hues, black, white, and brown. Once again, no evidential proof of how they lost their lives. And then we move forward to 1999. I believe this is when many of our communities got tired of the senseless killings and brutality and started speaking up. Naturally, we spoke up and were marched before then also. Most importantly, we now have a means to capture these injustices. Yes, the cell phone. And folk that are willing to speak up and advocate for victims. Although it's sad that we have to endure this fight and or movement in 2020, I most certainly see hope and believe that we have made a little progress. Think about it. There were no repercussions for those that lynched others. However, now, although they may not be prosecuted, which is sad, they are brought forth to the courts and their brutality is made known to everyone. We must continue to talk about the injustices. It may not prevent them. However, this must be a continuous conversation until there is a change. Jane Elliott and the Clark's experiments are good conversation starters for any audience. Jane Elliott is preferred for young to older adults, and the Clark's experiment is good for youth. If you are completing these experiments and or have conversations regarding racism with a group, try to get a feel of everyone's emotions before asking questions and or engaging them in conversation regarding racism. Someone that feels comfortable leading the conversation should lead the conversation. Please remember that some are still hurt about the past. Hurt people hurt people. Those that are hurt may hurt others' feelings when asked questions, and others are just trying to understand and help, not intrude and or add insult to injury. In this slide, a picture of Jane Elliott's blue eyes, brown eyes exercise is shared, in addition to a video of the Clark's doll study. These two studies could be integrated into a classroom setting to have an in depth conversation regarding racism. Additionally, having a video discussion with either of these studies is another suggestion. Either experiment could be viewed via video and then discussed, just as you would discuss a book.
Anderson Cooper, AC 360, CNN weeknights 10 Eastern.
There are lots of different colors for skin. I have questions for you about these pictures of different children. After I read the question, I want you to point to the picture that fits the story.
Are children colorblind in America?
Show me the smart child.
Show me the mean child.
Can you show me the dumb child?
Show me the nice child.
Is bias measurable even at an early age?
Why is she the bad child?
Because she's black. And why is he the ugly child? Because he looks like he's white.
Why is he the dumb child?
Because he has dark brown skin. Why is she the bad child? Because she makes fun of everybody else's skin color.
How much do kids learn from what they see and hear from adults?
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like.
And show me the child who has a skin color most adults don't like.
These are questions that we, along with CNN's Soledad O'Brien and a team of psychologists hired by CNN, spent months investigating through tests, interviews with children and their parents. But they're questions that have been asked for decades. The first doll study ignited controversy in the 1940s when psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark pioneered studies in the effects of segregation in schools by asking African American kids to choose between black and white dolls. The so-called doll test found black kids overwhelmingly preferred white over black. Those results were at the center of the landmark 1954 Supreme Court case Brown versus the Board of Education that desegregated American schools. Now, with the first African American president and nearly 60 years after segregation was overturned, we wondered, where are we today? How do kids see differences in race? What we discovered might shock you, but first, how we got there.
Skin color, child skin color estimate.
Okay, yeah.
We asked renowned child psychologist and University of Chicago researcher Dr. Margaret Beal Spencer to design a pilot study for CNN and analyze the results.
Our children are always near us, because we're a society. And what we put out there, kids report back. You ask the question, they'll give you the answer.
Spencer's team tested more than 130 kids in 8 schools with very different racial and economic demographics. Half of the schools were in the north, half in the south. Oh, nicely done. While the country is much more diverse today than in the 1940s, the children in this project are from 2 age groups and 2 races, white and black, to better allow comparison to the original doll study. 4 and 5-year-old children were asked a series of questions about these images. 9 and 10-year-old children were asked questions about the same images as well as this color bar chart. The tests led us to 3 major findings. First, white children as a whole responded with a high rate of what researchers call white bias, identifying the color of their own skin with positive attributes and darker skin with negative attributes.
Show me the dumb child.
Dumb child.
Okay, why is she the dumb child?
Because she has black skin.
Show me the mean child. Why is he the mean child?
Because she's brown.
Show me the bad child. Why is he the bad child?
Because she is black.
Okay. Show me the ugly child. Why is he the ugly child?
Because she's brown, black.
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like. And show me the child who has the skin color most adults don't like. Show me the child who has the skin color most children like. Show me the child who has the skin color most children don't like. Show me the child who has the skin color most girls want. Show me the child who has the skin color most girls don't want.
The questions that got overwhelmingly white biased answers?
Show me the dumb child.
About 76% of the younger white children pointed to the two darkest skin tones.
Show me the mean child.
About 66% of the younger white children pointed to the two darkest skin tones.
Show me the child who has the skin color most children don't like.
Again, about 66% of the younger white children pointed to the two darkest skin tones.
Show me the bad child.
More than 59% of the older white children pointed to the two darkest skin tones. But some white children did have more race neutral responses.
So could you show me the good looking child? So what are you thinking? I know you pointed to them all, but tell me what you're thinking.
I'm thinking that I do not care if they are black, white, mixed, or any kind of race. I think that it matters who they really are.
Despite the recent tragedy of lynchings and or murders, we are making progress toward an all lives matter society. I share these two photos because in one, we have mostly black constituents. However, in the other picture, we have constituents in another country protesting for equality. Without a doubt, we are still seeking equality. However, I believe it is encouraging when the nation there were protesters all over the world after George Floyd's lynching recognizes that racism is an issue and we need to seek change to prevent it. A call to action. I heard a wonderful quote while watching United Shades of America. One thing I know for sure is when people get to know each other, they can't hate each other. Janet Bell. I believe that I believe that quote is so profound, powerful and true. When we do not take the time to get to know each other and or the culture, it's so easy to not have to care for and or to hate another. However, when we at least try to understand and or get to know each other, it's a plausible solution to curb and or prevent hate, which could also prevent racism. What is your takeaway from this presentation? How will you contribute to preventing racism? I will continue to have the conversation about racism with whomever seeks to have the conversation. I will continue to support organizations that benefit the well being of communities, as well as organizations that educate and provide resources for youth. I will also continue to vote and complete the census in hopes that it will change unjust policies. Are you seeking ways to prevent and or have a conversation about racism? If so, the following slide provides a few resources that could be wonderful conversation starters. First Carry's recommended anti-racism resources list shares a few articles, books, and movies regarding anti-racism.